Yeah, we have an amazing evening plan for you now with some really inspiring speakers that I'm happy to have here. So this is a collaboration with the Gothenburg Women Scientists group. Now we have Anne Farewell here. She's going to talk a little bit about that. I asked the group a question a couple of months ago, several months ago, like, who is your role model, like local role model? Who do you want to nominate to talk to people today? And we got so many nominations. It was a very difficult task to choose the people that are going to speak here tonight. So I'm thinking we have to do this again, and again, and again, because everyone is to talk. So yeah, so we have Anne Farewell from Gothenburg Women Scientists. And then we have Charlotte Sellberg. You can stand up and show yourself. Hi. Celine Öse. That was good? Yeah, that was really good. Yeah. Perfect. Sara Leren. And Cecilia Maila.
We practiced this before.
This
one.
Give him a big hand. Sit down and Anne.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I also am extremely happy to see so many of you here today. And I'm going to start out with a talk that maybe isn't so much inspirational, but maybe motivational before we have our inspirational talks. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Gothenburg Women Scientists. And how it was created and why I think we need these kind of events in this kind of group. So Gothenburg Women Scientists was started about 1.5 years ago with me and several other women at the university or at in pharmaceutical companies, for example. And we identified a need, and the need is exemplified by my own department, I'm sorry to say. If we look at the population of our department as of April last year, you look at the percentage of women we have for PhD students, we have more women than men. Then you hit postdoc, and we lose a lot of the women. It stays pretty steady through early career stages and lectureship, and then at professor, it just crashes. All right, so this is many of our daily life, this is what we see around us. And I won't just say this one department is terrible, because if you look at the statistics around the world, you find the same thing. This is from the EU. This looks between first-year students up to full professors in all fields. So this is not just natural science. This is all fields at university. And there's a very dramatic effect here. If we look at natural science and engineering, it's even worse. It starts out worse, and it just gets worse. That's why we have started this group. If we look, well, we think Sweden is famous for gender neutrality, let's say. If we look at Sweden specifically, what you see here, another set of data which has 58% of the students at universities in Sweden are female, but as of 2011, only 23% of professors. And this is going up, yay, that's the right direction, but it's still around here if you had the data from now. Again, this is all fields. And some fields are very heavily, have a lot of women, and some fields not so many. So we separate a little bit. We look at natural science here on the bottom, humanities up here, and you have medicine and health. So again, everything's increasing, but it's still crazy low. So that's academia. If we look a little broader and ask, what about researchers in general? If we include researchers in companies and other places. Well, if you look worldwide, only 29% of researchers are women. And that seems very shameful to me, because in a time when we have so many global problems, Why are we losing almost half of our talented women in this process? So what's happening here? One thing I want to point out, something that's a little contradictory, which is that Sweden does have a very gender-neutral society, relatively. But there's something called the STEM gender equality paradox. STEM means science, technology, engineering, and math. If you look at an index of gender equality, where this is good, and here's Sweden up here, Finland, Norway up here, and you look at the percent of women who are graduating in STEM fields, it actually decreases with the more gender equality you have in a society, which I did not expect to see this. What the authors suggest, and we don't know exactly why this is, but what the authors suggest is that in societies where women have lots of choices as to what they're going to study, they choose not to study science. And that, to me, is a terrible thing, and to many people here, why wouldn't they want to study science? And that's what we need to start to answer. I just want to comment, it's not because they're not interested. That's been shown over and over. It's not because they're unable, that they're not good at math, for example. That's been shown over and over. That's not the reason. There's something else going on. And so I'm going to point to a few things that are going on, which is there's not just the leaky pipeline where we lose women because for whatever reason, but the whole system is broken. And several pieces of evidence for this are shown here. First was a study where they took one CV, but they randomly gave it a male name or a female name and sent it out to researchers to hire a technician. And they asked them to rank them according to competence, hireability, and whether they wanted to mentor that person. And what you can see is that the male name was associated with higher scores in all of these, even though they were identical CVs. And if they wanted to hire them, the salary they wanted to give them was much higher for the male than the female. That's one thing, that we are judged on our name, not the CV. A second thing is shown here. A study last year showed that women and men in various kinds of companies and institutions who had equal performance review, had the same success rate, the men were 14 times more likely to get rewarded in the sense of promotions, more money. In our case, it would be lab space, things like that. So what happens here is that even though women are doing equally well, they get less resources. And less resources in academia means fewer publications. In other fields, it might mean fewer patents or fewer other kinds of success. If we look at publications, this is a crazy looking table here. I'll just explain quickly what it is. They looked at hundreds of thousands of papers, and they looked at the authors. And they asked how many of those authors had identifiable names as female. And they ranked them. So some of the biology things are up at the top. Down at the bottom, you have computer science, physics, etc. And then they did a prediction. They looked over time. And they asked, how long will it take until there is gender parity in publishing? And both with total authors and first author, last author, etc. For physics, it was 260 years until there will be gender equality. Statistics is infinite because it's actually going the wrong direction. My field, molecular biology, is much better than these, 45 years. Chemistry, 50 years. Botany, which is a very female-dominated field, it's still 25 years, the entire generation, until we expect to have neutral publications. So that's one thing you see, another thing you see. I can just mention quickly the gender pay gap. This is other countries, but it exists all over the world. Even in Sweden, the gender pay gap is 13%. And female professors in Sweden get paid on at least 10% lower starting salary. And then finally, if you add on to this, things like this. This paper came out this week, sexual harassment in Australia in academia. Almost 50% of women report some kind of sexual harassment. This happens in Sweden. There's been cases of bullying in very famous institutes around the world in the last year. So these kinds of hostile work environments are on top of all this. So to summarize what's happening here, women are generally judged worse from the beginning. Therefore, they're less likely to be hired or promoted. They are less rewarded, both, I didn't talk about grants specifically, but both in terms of grants as well as other institutional things, which means they do less research because of that, which means they get fewer papers, which leads to this spiral, which together leads to a situation where women are not succeeding or not progressing as quickly as they should, or leave and say, screw it, I'm going on and doing something else, which explains in part much of what we see in the statistics. All right, that was the depressing part. Now we're going on to the a little bit happier part. What are we doing about this? We're not just ignoring this. The first thing I want to emphasize was what Chalmers has done last year. Chalmers launched Genie. This is a fabulous program that they've initiated, where Genie aims to increase the number of professors at Chalmers from 17% to 40%, and remove structural obstacles that hamper career progression. They got 300 million crowns over 10 years to do this. And Pernilla Vittung is fantastic in leading this initiative. So Chalmers is actively doing something about that. Our group, Gothenburg Women Scientists, is doing a tiny bit. We don't have 300 million. But we also are looking to highlight these inequalities and make more people aware of this, and create a network of women who can interact and get support, and also advice about how to have a successful career. In addition to inspiring younger women to go into science and looking at gender equality. And you're welcome to join if you go to gowosci.se or on our Facebook page. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. Well, I'm applauding you guys. I just want to say we're going to take questions at the end after the talks because we don't have a lot of time, because we want everyone to talk. All right, thank you.
I was actually going to say that, but okay.
I'm sorry, I took your...
Well, we're just going to change presentation, and then, yeah, we'll take questions afterwards, because Avin here, give him a hand, he's back there, he's going to put some snacks out for us. So after this, we go out, we have some snacks and chat and mingle a little bit, okay? Perfect.
I'll put the website.
Which one is yours?
That's the cheat. All right. Is it the right height? I have a tiny head, so most of the time these things don't work. Right, hello everyone. I am Céline Zich. This is how you pronounce that. I'm French, hence the weird name and the accents. And I am based at the Department of Earth Sciences of the University of Gothenburg, where I recently got a tenure track position, so it is possible. And I did not prepare any presentation, but I thought that instead you just can observe the welcome page, or the home page of my website. So that you have my name, you roughly have my topic, anyway. I'm a physical oceanographer that is most interested in polar stuff, So the currents in the ocean and how the ocean is melting the sea ice and the glaciers. And I go at sea quite often. This is a surprisingly not too sexist environment, I must say. There's been the occasional weird comments and the occasional weirdo, but it's actually quite welcoming. So I'm not going to talk about that. We were asked to talk about one event that was really critical for us as a female in science. And it's not going to be nice, but maybe not very inspiring, but at least there's some positive conclusions. So here we go. Just so that you're warned, you know. So first, back in time about a year ago, I was fully aware of the statistics that Anne had presented just from my own experience and looking around in the department and noticing that really, well, there's a serious lack of females around there, and it's quite hard to get a job as a female. Like there's, yeah, plenty of depressing literature on how you're assessed differently, on how your recommendation letters are written differently, and all of these things that really make it clear that as a female in academia, you have to work a shitload before to just get to the same level as men, or to get the same chance as a man. Or at least that's how I felt it. So I was really the machine, let's say, working all the time until I was too hungry to continue, go home, eat, continue working until I would fall asleep, working over the weekends, outputting paper after paper, adding as many lines on my CV as I could, whatever. And then my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And it was a hard time because I was a postdoc at that time, so very insecure time, well, definitely no stability whatsoever. So I couldn't just go on sick leave and look after her or even look after myself. Like I had, yeah, sure, I could, but then I would be out because my head of department definitely was not understanding, and that made it clear that, yeah, as soon as my contract runs out, then the door is there. So you have the pressure on one hand of the family, let's say, and the pressure of the job insecurity. Which one do you prioritize? Do you prioritize spending time with someone? Or do you prioritize your own future? And I spent then several months feeling guilty whatever I was doing, basically. If I was at work, I would feel guilty first about being really struggling to concentrate, because let's face it, that's not a happy time. And also about not being there to help her. But if I was there with her in France, then I would feel guilty because, well, I would do that during my holidays, of course, and I mean, I describe how I was, so to me, holidays just meant that I was at home and still working, so it was, I mean, it was hard. That meant that suddenly I was forced to not really perform anymore, and I could tell that I was really not a nice person anymore, because I hope you've not experienced that. Well, unfortunately, that's something that we all have to experience at some point, but you really don't sleep well when that happens. And as a result, since I hardly slept, that meant I was really, really aggressive all the time against all of my colleagues and also against the students I had to supervise. And growing up in France, I don't know if that has changed or if it was really specific to my environment as well, but I had been brought to this, well, what I call 80s feminism mindset, where the way to succeed is to behave like a man, more or less, as a woman. In particular, well, very toxic masculinity, we call that now, like a man that does not show any feeling in particular. So I was really trying to not show anything and to not talk to anyone and to keep everything inside and pretend that everything was okay until, you guess it, that did not go very well. And I just exploded in tears in my office one day at my office mate. And that's where I discovered that, why was I doing that? Because when you start talking to others, you realize that first, there are lots of people that are willing to help you. No matter how competitive that environment is, people remain nice. I mean, there are some people that, no, I've learned that way that, okay, there are They are charming, they appear charming, but actually, no. You should avoid these people. But there are also some people that really surprised me, and that I discovered that by accidentally talking about them, because I was at a moment where I was not feeling fine, they opened up as well, and I discovered that there are so many people that share similar stories of sick parents when they were young. There was one person that lost her sister, one that lost his child, and that's where you discover that, wow, I'm not alone, and it feels nice to talk to others. And that's, I mean, there are people to talk to. There are people that are willing to listen. And I guess that's also the point of an event like that, to realize that you're not alone to feel the way you're feeling. Social media really helps for that as well. I realized, like, I'm more of a Twitter person than Facebook, but the number of times where I see threads of people complaining about things that I'd been thinking, realizing that, wow, okay, I'm not the only one thinking it's not okay the way things are working. So there was this aspect. That is good, you have people to talk to. There was the nastier aspect as well of the people that judge you. Because no matter how far I considered I had gone and how much I consider I had done and that I could be proud of myself, I'm still a female. And especially in France, when I went back and that I would help my mother and have to go to the pharmacy or go to the shopping and so on, you would always bump into people that ask you, but what are you doing? Why are you not going home now and helping her, like becoming a full-time carer? And I could tell that that was specifically targeted at me as a daughter. That if I had been a man, they would have totally understood that, of course, I had my own life in a different country even, come on. And that's sure, like already coming a few days here and there was super nice. But no, as a woman, I should have just given up, put a break to everything, and gone home and, well, help her with everything. So that's another way to do a bit of sorting also through your friends list, I must say, seeing how people react to this type. That was a bit of a wake-up call also to realize that there's progress, definitely, in gender equality, but there are still many countries and many people that still think that in such a situation, it is the female role and the daughter's role to just go and help, no matter how much her life is impacted. And then there was also the happy, so to say, the fact that I did have to change my life. That person that lost his child said that sentence that now I will always remember, that, you know, there's more to life than just papers. And yeah, actually, I mean, it's easy for me to say now that I get a tenure track position and that I'm also not in that weird, unstable position, but I realized that I was not happy at all. Yeah, sure, I was outputting all of these papers and thinking, when I get tenured, I can do this. When I am tenured, I can have a pet, I can have a hobby, I can travel. And that it's completely silly, because anything can happen at any time. So just don't postpone being happy for the name of that extra paper. You know, just walk out, go for a walk in the forest because it's nice and you want to listen to the birds, or go home and play with your cats, or spend time with your family, with your friends. Go for fika just because you feel like it. And, well, yeah, enjoy your life. So, main messages, there are still cavemen, avoid them. There are lots of people around you. Like, your network should be surprised by how many people it contains and how nice these people can be. So when something bad happens to you, talk about it. And don't forget, enjoy life. Don't think just about your career. I'll stop here.
Yes. So, hello everyone. It's nice to see so many here today. I'm going to do a little bit of a different presentation. I'm going to talk about my life in general and how the journey into academia went. Because it was not really the clear choice for me. But today I have a postdoc position at Chalmers, and actually today my phone rang and I got offered a permanent position at the Department of Applied IT at Gothenburg University. So yeah, I hope that this will inspire some people who didn't taken the path to pursue it. Well, I was born in 1974. These are some baby pictures of me and my family. My father, he worked as in the engine room aboard big freight ships, carrying bananas all over the world. And my mom worked also serving all the officers in the mess, as they say in Sweden. So I come from a working class background, actually. And when it was my time in gymnasiet, in high school, to make a career choice, I went for being an assisting nurse. So I studied that for 2 years and started working. First with people with Alzheimer's and dementia. Later on, I continued to work at a psychiatric ward. I worked with people with autism. And that really sparked an interest in how people perceive the world and how they think and how they interact in the world. So when I was a little bit older, I went back to school again because I really wanted to understand people in a deeper sense. So I started to study cognitive science at the University of Skövde, one of the older students at the program. But it was good. I had a really good time studying and found myself very interested in all of the topics, being a very busy and engaged student. So when I came further in my studies, my supervisors and my teachers started noticing that I was really motivated and did good work. So Jessica Lindblom, as I was talking about on Facebook, she offered me to do my master thesis in actually a research project. So I was in this dental informatics project, MedView. That was a big project between VGR and Sahlgrenska, Chalmers, and the University of Skövde. And we studied, the researchers from Skövde studied how the dentists were actually working with electronic dental cards and journal systems in the clinical setting. And I was part of collecting this data by video camera and observations. And I actually published one of my first papers in that project. And that got me really, really interested in pursuing an academic career. And for 2 years I stayed at the University of Skövde, working as a lecturer in cognitive science and human-computer interaction. I started to wanted to do like the PhD studies, the research school, because I wanted to be in science. I wanted to continue to publish and being offered more than like short-term teaching jobs. So in 2013, I got a call from the University of Gothenburg, and they wanted me to come here to study how they use simulators in maritime training. So I did my thesis on that topic. I had Roger Seljö as my main supervisor and Mona Lundin as the second supervisor or assisting supervisor. And we are still working together, me and Mona, a lot. And Roger is also co-authoring some papers with me right now. But it's a very supporting environment in education and in cognitive science, like the behavioral sciences. I understand that other kind of departments are more competitive, but we actually like to lift each other up and cooperate instead of competing. So I've been very lucky in that kind of sense, that I met some really good, nice people along the way. And also enabled me to start a family. I met my husband, Roine, in 2017, and we got very much in love. And the year after, we had Felix. So it went very fast, but and we got married in a fever, as Johnny Cash said. And yeah, I took some time off, of course, being a new mom. But before I went on parental leave, I had submitted an application for a draft to Forte for getting funding for doing a postdoc also on maritime training, because it's very little research done about this, and my thesis is almost the only thing published so far. And they believed that this was a really important topic, because these sailors, they are handling massive ships, and when they collide, it's disastrous both for humans and the environment. So we really have to make sure that they're trained properly. So that's like my mission right now, and I'm looking in the thesis I did on training, the training parts. Now I look at assessment and certificates that they are doing in simulated environments to see how well these competency tests are performed by the instructors. And when I did this presentation, I didn't know about my permanent position yet. But so that's another story about success. But I will say that I think I've been lucky also in the Swedish context, and in coming from like behavioral sciences and education that are very aware about gender issues and equality, and really striving to be equal. So I have another kind of perspective to this.
And that awfully cute baby you saw, that's my nephew.
Can look at him again. Yeah, this is, yeah, this is. So, yeah.
Hoppas att det funkar. Ja, hoppas att det funkar.
It worked before when we tried, as you know. It always works when you try it out.
Good. Nej, ibland när man använder dem. Ibland när man använder de adapterna så vill man ju inte funka riktigt. Den vill inte. Nu. Bra. Hej!
Just building up the suspense here. Hi, I'm Sara Lydia. I'm the only one of these lovely ladies that doesn't work in science, actually. I studied cognitive science, just like Charlotte, but no, in Gothenburg. I went into tech instead, so I'll tell you a bit about that. So I was asked, okay, what have been some of the important stepping stones or moments that really defined my careers? And well, to summarize it, it's been about brains and bunnies and belonging and some other stuff. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I work as the Director of Inclusive Design at In Use. That means that I get to help my colleagues when they try to make the world a better place by making design of stuff more inclusive. It's a great job. And I get to do fun things like this as well. I get to come here and talk to you guys. And that's really fun. My career in inclusive design actually started quite a long time ago, as early as 1994, actually. I was 16 years old. I was living in Mölnlycke outside of Gothenburg. And in the 1990s, both Mölnlycke and Gothenburg had some serious issues when it came to racism, homophobia, other types of intolerance. So I did the only sensible thing that I could think of, and that was to become a punk rocker. Pretty sensible, right? Because it was such a good way to very clearly take a stand for inclusion, for equal rights, against racism, against homophobia. That summer, I went to a scout camp in Holland and hung out with Dutch punk rockers. And when I came back home, I started my first job. It was a summer job at the Mölnlycke Library, municipal library. I actually spent quite a lot of time that summer going through the magazines and reading them of Nazi propaganda that our local Nazi skinheads had put there. Because it was so important for me that the library be a place of inclusion, where everyone was welcome. So that's where those ideas about inclusion and belonging all started, basically. And then I got older, and I went to university, and I studied cognitive science. And the best way to put that into some kind of use was to go into what was then called human-computer interaction. And then we started talking a lot about usability, and nowadays we talk a lot about UX, creating great user experience. And it's basically the same thing that I've been doing all the time. It's all about understanding human behavior, understanding how our weird brains work, and adapting products and services after how our brains actually work. And then I went into tech. And I often felt like this little guy over here. You know, it was all fun and games, but I was sort of the odd one out, both being a woman and also being interested in human behavior and design. This picture is from one of my favorite books. It's called Spotty, or Pricken in Swedish. It's a really great book. If you haven't read it, you should. People were saying stuff like, you know, users are stupid, design doesn't matter, get a bit tiresome after a while. And like Celine, I didn't get very good support for when I had personal crisis. My father got really sick. He got dementia and he got severely suicidal, but I didn't get much support from that. I was only told to, you don't keep that at home, don't bring it to work. One of the pivotal points was when I was super pregnant, and I had 2 weeks left until my wonderful daughter was supposed to arrive, and I was still not allowed to do work from home, even though I was fully able. And at that time, I started thinking, what am I doing here? I mean, really, I should go someplace else. And then I started working at In Use. In Use is a company that's been around for about 15 years. It's all about making the world a better place through great design. And it felt like this. It felt like coming home. It felt like finding my tribe. It was very powerful. It still is. I've been in Use for 5 years, and it's still pretty amazing. Because I can talk design, and we can talk human behavior, and I have an employer that really supports me when I have family issues. And said, of course, we'll solve this. It shouldn't be strange, but it is strange when you come from a hostile tech environment. It's quite a big thing. But that's been pivotal in me evolving further in my career. And working at InUse has also made it possible for me to put human behavior in the right context, talk about human behavior in relationship to, business value and all those kinds of stuff. Because lots of organizations, we create lots of services or physical products or whatever. We always have service owners that invest in these services to get some sort of impact out of it. And so far, so good. But this impact over here, it doesn't just magically happen. It happens in use. There are users over here. They put effort into these kinds of services to get some sort of benefit out of it. And if this equation isn't working, if it's too hard for me and I don't get the amount of impact that I'm looking for, the benefits out of it, I won't be happy. And the impacts won't be happening either. Because impact happens in use. We need to understand human behavior in order to create maximum business value. It all makes sense. And one of those other important insights for me has been to get use from my studies in cognitive science and neuroscience, because one of the things that we often do when we try to design stuff is that we look at this blob in the middle here, the average users. But they're typically not very good at describing their needs. They're actually pretty bad at describing how they are behaving and why. And it has a lot to do with something called cognitive economy. Most brains spend a lot of effort trying to automate stuff. And as soon as something has gotten automated, you have a really hard time explaining what you're doing and why. Imagine trying to describe exactly what you do when you drive a car. It's really difficult because your brain has automated that. So what we need to do instead, if we want to get a clear understanding of human behavior, is that we need to look at the extreme users. And that can be people who are either beginners or they're really experienced. They have a really hard time, really struggling, or they're experts. Because they will tell you stuff like, this web page really gave me anxiety. Really good to know. Or, oh, shit, man, I really didn't understand this. What does it mean? Or, couldn't we put this over here? Or couldn't we solve it in a different way? That helps us a lot when we're trying to design good stuff to actually get us to understand human behavior. One of my favorite people in the whole world is called Dana Chisnell. She works at the Center for Civic Design. Center for Civic Design, how cool is that? They're trying to make America a better place, strengthen democracy through great design. They were doing research on something called the Anywhere ballot. That's a ballot that should work for anyone, so that people don't make mistakes when they're voting, which is happening a lot. And they were doing research on people with low literacy, because that's a huge problem in the US. And she said, I came away from that study thinking, why are we testing with anyone with high literacy? Designing for people with low literacy would make it easier for people who are distressed, distracted, sleep-deprived, on medication, whatever. If I could build this into everything, I would. And I think that's the key, to focus on those extreme users, to build designs that will make the world a better place. So, to sum this up, belonging has been really important for me to be able to push my boundaries, to have that safe place. And diversity has also been a key to look at diversity also from a design and from a business point of view. That's what made my career really good, I think. And that's a balance that I think everyone needs, that balance between where you're safe so that you can go out into the world and experience a lot of friction. Because that friction is needed if we want to change the world to a better place. Thank you.
Okay.
Just talk amongst yourself a little bit. We'll be back soon.
Okay, I don't dare to move it. I was gonna move it so you guys can see a bit better. All right. Budes Buahtin, mun nammalle Inger Cecilia Inkku Mailaba. Hi, my name is Cecilia Mailaba. I'm a PhD student at Chalmers University of Technology. And first I would like to thank the previous speakers for your talks, very interesting to listen to. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and speak today. And very much thank you for the nomination. I think it was a huge honor to be nominated as a role model. And it really gave me the energy to keep on pushing and keep working in the same direction. Today I'm gonna talk about myself and my background, how I ended up in my position where I am today, and also a bit about what I'm doing right now. And I will start at the very beginning. So this is a picture of the place where I'm from. And in the horizon, you can see Kebnekaise. I grew up here in a place and in a culture where you can see environmental impact and climate change very clearly. So we can see what environmental change can do and affect entire societies, relatives and friends in a very negative way. And with this background, it grew my biggest motivation, and that is to contribute to a more equal and a more sustainable world. When I was a kid, I translated this aim into wanting to become a garbage collector. Now, it didn't really turn out that way. I chose to go into academia instead. I got my bachelor's degree from the Norwegian University of Life Science, which I did in collaboration with University of Oslo. By this time, I was very frustrated that so little was happening while we were having so much data and knowledge. So I got engaged in several student organizations, and I also went on several environmental conferences and tried to bring my knowledge and the knowledge that I received from these kind of forums back to my universities. And this was around 8 years ago, and the interest of these topics were kind of low, especially in Norway. So one of the things I worked most with was to bring in food and to lift the amount of environmental impact that is coming from the entire food sector and try to bring food into the environmental policies. Some things went good and some things didn't really work out great. One of the things we did was to start a petition to get one plant-based, low-impact meal on each restaurant at campus. So we also suggested Meatless Monday, but at this time it was extremely radical, so it was no point. In our petition, this 8 years ago, we got 159 supporters. Our aim was 1,000, so it was not passed. I'm very happy that this has changed, and also the attitude for action when it comes to environmental issues. But nonetheless, I've also faced a lot of difficulties, thankfully also success, which has kept me going. But I got also a lot of negative comments. I still do, but many of them are related to my gender. And that was when I got that I noticed that I was dismissed in a way that my male co-students were not. And that really got me interested in structural power hierarchies. And I'm working part-time with that. I will come back to that a bit later. I'm sure that you all have seen diagrams like this. We all know that it's a huge difference in the emission levels of different foods. Or maybe you can see that the one to the right, the most right, is beef, Swedish beef. And down here we have pulses and grains and all plant-based things. So right now I'm working with pulses. This is my area of research. I'm working with Swedish beans. So the very reason to why I wanted to get into research was because of this diagram. I wanted to provide data and knowledge to companies, legislation, and policymakers on sustainable foods in order to make a larger shift. So I came to Gothenburg and Chalmers for my master's with this environmental aim. I went abroad one semester to Indonesia to work with fermentation of soybean kefir. And when I came back, I had an idea for what I wanted to do with my master thesis project, which I got to do at the food science department at Chalmers. I did 1 year master's project because I wanted really bad to work with research afterwards. So I used this year to learn as much as possible, but also to apply for grants, because I knew that if I were to continue on this track with my own project ideas, I had to solve financiation myself. I got help from my seniors. They commented on my applications, and they also were co-applicants in order to strengthen the applications. So I really, really wanted to do this. So in the beginning, I worked full-time, but I only took out 50% salary to make the grant last longer. But then I got another one that was a bit larger. So then I finally could get a full-time salary as well. And fortunately, I still have that. My focus on my current projects are fava beans. I'm doing analysis of nutritional and anti-nutritional components in different bean varieties to provide data on which ones that are best suited for food and feed. So the anti-nutrients, they affect the bioavailability of nutrients such as iron and zinc. So depending on the content of the anti-nutrients, the nutrients will be absorbed more or less, and some of it will be just passed through the gastrointestinal tract, and this can cause deficiencies. So it's very important to know the content of these in a food product. I'm also interested in how different protein sources affect the human eating them. So despite this panda, I do human clinical trials. And then in these, we study the iron absorption from these different protein sources, which is fava bean protein, fish protein, and meat protein. And we also want to study the metabolic effects from a single meal. It's important since we want to know how these new food products affect our health, because we're looking into texturized protein, like the ones that exist in, for example, soy sausages. They have been texturized to make them more chewable. So I got to continue with my project and my ideas, which I'm very grateful for, and it's huge privilege to work with something that you feel very passionate about and that you have been wanting and striving towards for a long time. Yeah, this is me in Almedalen debating sustainability. So as you can see, I'm very engaged in my topic. But as I mentioned previously with this power structures, I don't only get to do my PhD, I actually also work with equality in my department and internally on Chalmers. And this means mapping out current situation, analyzing data, and reviewing our activities, among other things. Through this part of my job, which is also my institutional work, I have managed to see some patterns that have now resulted in a qualitative study that we will couple with quantitative data as a yearly report that we do on equality. And these patterns have been extra visible when it comes to PhD students that tend to be an extra vulnerable group. And that's why I'm now, in parallel to my regular research, doing a PhD study where I try to map out all of these differences. And it's very interesting, especially since many of the areas, so much of the results that I'm looking at are gender marked. So the results will be depending on what gender the PhD student has. And I hope this study will be published later this year, and I'm happy to show you the results when it's out. So some of the actions are huge, like the ones I said, the large studies, but some of the actions are very small and easy to make. In this example, we changed the dress code from gender marked into gender neutral. This was done last month. This is from the invitation to the doctoral conferment ceremony. So a change like this can have a very big impact on an individual level, but it's so easy to make. And lastly, I would like to end with some comments that I've received during this equality work that I do. So as I said, and was mentioned previously by Anne, we have this Genie project that is huge on Chalmers. So I feel very proud to work at Chalmers, but it's not perfect. Some constructive feedback. It's unnecessary to work with gender equality. Men and women have different brains and will never be equal. Equality within the academia is nonsense. Don't waste your time on that. And the final one. Women and men have different interests. Only men want to become professors. So, jokes aside, you can feel very lonely when you're working on these issues. And we must address them together, because no one can do it alone. And this talk today was about role models. And I want to end with my role models are every single person that dares and have the energy to stand up against comments like this. Every person that dares to be the annoying one and don't let sexist or racist comments just pass by. To be able to do so, it's very important to have support and solidarity. To have a safe space and to be inside a safe context. I feel like Gothenburg Women in Science is such a kind. You can also create your own. Together, we are stronger than structures. Thank you.
So much. Yeah, belonging, networking, support. That's one of the reasons we're here today, actually. So after we're done here and we have time to talk, that's one thing we should do, get to know each other and network. And can you please just come up here and let's give them another big hand. Let's hope that the snacks are out. Let's go and snack and talk. Thank you so much for coming.